Welcome to Spiritually Fierce, the podcast. I am your host, Dr. Rikki Jane Adams, principal and founder of the Institute for Intuitive Intelligence and creator of the Spiritually Fierce movement. Spiritually Fierce is not just a phrase. It is a movement of awakening consciousness of which we are all a part, if we want to be. In each episode, we'll explore what it means to be spiritually fierce, how to become it, and why it is the revolution in consciousness that will save the world. Join me and my fierce guests for deep conversations on spirituality beyond the trinkets and superstitions of the New Age that will support you to increase your power to serve. Welcome back to Spiritually Fierce, the podcast. And today I am joined by a woman who has had a huge influence on my life, probably in ways that even she is not aware of. Our paths have crossed in person sometimes, but I think mostly it's sort of energetic interwebs transmissions and crossing paths rather than a lot of in-person experience, even though we discovered we currently live in the same suburb in Melbourne. I am joined by the glorious Julie Parker, who many of you will know. She is the founder of the Beautiful You Coaching Academy, where she passionately trains heart-centered people to become life coaches. As the co-founder of Priestess Temple School, a global movement devoted to uplifting modern-day priestesses as they explore sacred leadership and service in the 21st century, Julie is committed to contributing to a world where presence, healing, and social justice are honored. And I think you came into my sphere, I came into yours at the time when that priestess energy was really taking over your life. And I think that's probably the right way to describe it. It kind of took you over and had her way with you, which is all to our benefit. She has trained with high priestesses and modern day mystery schools from all over the world. And your book that we are focusing on today is called Priestess, Ancient Spiritual Wisdom for Modern Sacred Women. Welcome, my darling. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Rikki Jane. I'm honoured to be here with you for this conversation.
Yeah, I feel like I've been, wanting to sit down and have another conversation with you for a long time. I had the privilege of being on your podcast several years ago now, and we've done Priestess TV as well. But I'm happy that I get to be the one asking the questions now. I often feel like what would Jules do? I have a question about that, like just giving up buying new clothes, shoes, and accessories this year, just following your lead. I'm like, how did Jules feel about this? Was Valentine's Day a reason she could go and buy herself all the jewelry she wanted? I didn't, but I did think about it. But I would love to know, my darling, the first question is then this book, Priestess, it's an uncompromising title. It's like, here is the book. Tell me how it came to be. Where did she come from?
Well, I suppose the surface-orientated answer is that it's come from my, over the past 10 years, re-emergence and journeying with the priestess archetype and embodying that as the human being that I am in this physical form in this lifetime right now. But really, when I peel back the layers of it, it's a book that my soul and incarnation has been writing for generations and hundreds and thousands of years, and all the life experiences of my ancients that have come through me to this point in time. And I guess that you're not likely to hear many authors say that things reached a particular point in time with them, with what they were writing, where they just had to write a book. It reaches that time where you're like, well, this is not a course, and it's not a blog post, and it's not an entire series of Instagram posts. This is a book. I have to write a book. It's coming through me. And so I think that things do eventually reach that point as well, where the calling to write it is just something that starts to come through you so strongly to the point where, well, you ignore it at your peril, really.
Yeah, and it hurts, right? Like it becomes a physical ache.
It does. And I think the really incredible thing now is that when it comes to actually writing a book and publishing a book, is that there is so few excuses that we can give ourselves these days for not actually writing and publishing that book with the option to self-publish. Once upon a time, you could only be traditionally published, and therefore how much of your book being picked up, published, things like that, to a certain extent was somewhat out of your control. There were decisions that were going to be made about your writing and your book as to whether or not that would happen. We can now make our own decisions about that should we choose to, which I think is a really exciting thing. And I think that there are undoubtedly many, many brilliant self-published books that exist and are out there. And in fact, I'm certain that some of them are even better than traditionally published books. But that is a whole other conversation.
Yeah, you're right. It's such a zeitgeist. I mean, this is a moment in time where that industry is being revolutionized. And, the democracy around publishing now means that, as you say, it's really down to our own willingness, our own commitment. And yes, there's some financial constraints, but even that you can do pretty cheaply, if you do it all DIY. There's two streams I want to pick up on in here. One is really about how did you meet the priestess within you? How did you know that was the subject, that was the thing that needed to go into a book? The other part is about your journey to publishing. So I think we'll start with the subject and then we'll go to the publishing.
Gosh, that's such a big question. And I think that in truth, I'm not 100% sure how to answer it, other than to say that through my journey of spiritual awakening, which, as I've already mentioned before, was always there and always bubbling and always happening, but really, really began to take flight about 8 years or so ago. And not coincidentally, that happened at the time when I launched my training academy. That's not a coincidence. I'm certain that those two things really came into sharp focus in my life together for a reason. Is that the path of the priestess, sacred leadership, embodiment, connecting with the divine, my own divinity within, became such a driving force for love and connection and alignment in my own life, that the words and feelings and thoughts and expressions around it just began to pour out of me. And Ricky Jane, from an egoic perspective, because I think that this is somewhat important to mention, because we're all human. Of course we are, having a divine experience as a human being, is that as I began to speak about these things in my life more people began to ask me about them. And say, can you tell me a little bit more about your altar practice? Or I want to learn more about the goddess. Can you share more? And so when people started to really come to me significantly with that, that's also when the real thoughts and ideas for putting something into a book really, really started to take flight.
Yeah, I love that. And for my first book, Spiritually Fierce, it was the same. It was that I'm saying these things again and again and again. Wouldn't it be more efficient if I just put it all in one place and, go, here you go, read this. And I can see that. And I think, we obviously share that passion for this archetype. And I love the intersections and the divergences in the way we work with her. But there is an energy I feel in the last decade of the if you're watching us on YouTube, you can see my hands, but if you're not, this might sound weird, but this uprising and of the priestess archetype. I wonder if you have thoughts about why she's so present with so many spiritual women, or women, I mean, generally in the world in the last decade. Why do we need her now?
Because the leadership that we have that is infiltrating every aspect of our life, in business, in the corporate world, in education, in politics, is broken and floundering. and not serving the most marginalized. It's never really served women.
Yeah.
It's never really served families, people who live with a disability, the neurodivergent, the LGBTQIA plus community, people of different cultures, races, those with a marginalized identity. It's just broken in so many different ways, and has been for such a long time. I mean, this is a whole topic and conversation in and of itself. And the archetype of the priestess, to me, is the embodiment of sacred leadership.
Yeah.
She is the embodiment of love, connection, relationship, surrender, fluidity, inclusion,
Yeah.
and so much more. And so the reason I think that we are seeing this emergence come through so strongly is because whether we consciously recognized it or not and said, the system is broken, white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, all of these things, I want to do something about that. I don't think it's necessarily come through us in that way, but just I want my life to be different.
Yeah.
I want my children's lives to be different. I want to feel connected to not just myself, but my community. I want to leave a legacy. I want to be part of something bigger. We feel disconnected. I want us to be connected in so many different ways. I could talk about this one for such a long time, but that's the reason that I think it's come forth so significantly now. It's because she is needed and we are needed.
Yeah. Yes, Jamar, Jamar. I love every word. And yes, if I was to kind of encapsulate what the priestess is to me, it is service before self. It is that sense of I have a responsibility to something bigger than just my own little piece of happiness. And it's a bold choice because we've been taught that the highest measure of success is house, kids, husband or partner, car, like be very, very safe, segregated in your own little community. Don't worry about what's going on over there. Just, keep attaining more, aspire to more in your own little piece. And she's the antidote to that. I totally love everything you share about that. So let's talk about this then. Okay, so you're speaking about her more. You realize it's time to put this down in a long form. It is worthy of that project. I've talked to a number of the authors of right, if you're going to give yourself over to a book, you got to know the subject is worthy, because that book is going to take your life for the time. And I remember reading some of your Instagram posts as you were writing, and you can feel even when you were like, I'm here in this beautiful location, you were somewhere out near not Hillsville,
the Dandenongs.
Yes. You've gone out on a writing, and it's still labor. It is labor to bring a book into the world. So tell us a little bit about your writing process. Okay, so you've got the subject, you've got the desire from an audience. How did you bring it into the world?
This is such a wonderful question, and I think it is such a great one to ask of all different authors, because my belief is that our answers, while they may carry some similarity, are going to be different for every single person. And I think it's also a wonderful myth busting or assumption busting question to ask authors as well. So in no particular order, Ricky Jane, first thing is that for anybody that thinks that you usually write a non-fiction book, I'm not going to say it's not the case for fiction, but for a non-fiction book, thinking that you're going to write it from the first word to the last in order, not usual. No, not usual, and certainly not the way that I wrote this book. I absolutely went intuitively into the spaces that just felt called for me to write first. And I think, in all honesty, felt the most flowing and easy to get out, because that then helps you get a platform and a foundation for further success. You're like, okay, I'm 10,000 words in now, I can keep going. So there was a lot of traversing backwards and forwards, not a linear process at all.
Yeah.
The second thing is, for me in writing, is that I have a very, very strong recognition in myself that I am a morning energized person.
Yeah.
And so for me, I was often writing in the wee hours of the morning, sometimes as early as 4:30 a.m. through until 7:30 a.m., 8 a.m. I don't write well at night. And so I was often getting up quite early in the morning to write and finding that that was a really wonderful time for me. And also, I'm a writer on the weekends because I find that during the business day where I might get more emails, people may need me more, I can get distracted more easily. That doesn't really work for me. I like to write in blocks of time, whether that's even just half an hour or whether it's 3 hours. That certainly works better for me.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing to share as well is that the more personal aspects of the book were the parts that I found the most challenging to write, because that's when my ego started to flare at me in different ways and saying, oh, people are not, everything from people are not going to be interested in this, keep it short, keep it short, keep it short, right through to don't say that, your mother's going to read it. Like, be careful. Auntie Jean's going to read this too, so you better be careful. So all of that stuff comes up. And so I kept getting these intuitive messages, leave that to the end. Don't go there too much. Just allow the rest of the book to fall into place. Then come back to the really personal aspects of it. And Julie, just constantly keep thinking, you're writing this from the perspective of being of service.
Yeah.
This is not about a platform for you and your story within the pages of this book. This is an expression of service. Keep that forefront. And that really helped me to write those parts as well.
Amazing. I love that because I absolutely agree with everything. I almost had that identical day today. I got up at 4:30 to write. I'm like weeks away from handing this book to the designer, and that is my primo time. And it's good to know that, but it's also really important that you give yourself permission then to change your life to suit that. Like, I go to bed at 8 o'clock. I'm not available to hang out right now with my partner and watch crappy TV. I have to really prioritize that. So that is an aspect that I think we'll often not have the discipline for and say, oh, I never find the time. It's like, well, I run a very busy business, 9 to 5. I do not have the time, right? So what are the choices I'm going to make to support this book? And I love hearing that in your example. And that understanding, the personal stories are the alchemy, though, don't you think? That when I'm reading a spiritual nonfiction and the author lets me into their experience, I feel myself just kind of melt into the text. And it's that beautiful paradox of writing that the personal and specific becomes or opens it to the universal. Like, if we speak too broadly, so and so says, or such and such, we can lose people. But when we actually give parts of ourselves to the story in that way, our audience can find themselves in that story. And I'm sure that's the way it's been for your audience, that you've given so many women permission to see that priestess energy within themselves. But I love that process of like, okay, do that part last.
Most definitely. And I am complete in agreement with you when it comes to reading things as well. I love reading nonfiction books. I'm a voracious reader, and yet I'm not often a reader of biographies or autobiographies. And I think that's why when I read a nonfiction book that does contain elements of someone's personal story, it really lands well for me too.
Yeah. I think of something like Mary Magdalene Revealed by Megan Watterson, which I think she beautifully dances between the autobiographical and the, theoretical. Like, she's a theologian, but she weaves the two so seamlessly together. And I really aspire to that level of refinement, that Saraswati energy. Like, it's just so easeful to read and such a pleasure. And I had that experience reading Priestess also. But I think that without those stories, something is missing. But again, it doesn't have to be confessional. And I think that thing of, I don't have to demonstrate my trauma as evidence of my right to be the one who tells you this story, which I think can be the danger of some spiritual nonfiction, where we feel we have to parade our suffering to get that sense that we have authority. That's another conversation.
It is indeed. And I fully understand what you say. Is like that's, we start to tip into territory there where it does become more about us than
Yeah.
it does about being of service, which means, well, for somebody such as yourself and I, we have tipped out of that priestess embodiment.
Yes.
And yeah, so we're trying, very much not to do that and to remain in service always.
Yes, yes. I think authenticity can be quite a confused word for a lot of people in the contemporary social media age, and it doesn't mean that you have to just give yourself away
No.
completely in order to be able to be valued. So
Mm.
let's talk about your publishing journey. So I know a little bit about this, but I would love for you to share whatever you want to about your story of getting Priestess published, which was or is with a publishing house. But how did you arrive at the point of publishing with who you chose to publish?
Mm. Well, it was a somewhat long journey, and I will try to give the Cliff Notes version of this. From the perspective of it went over many years, in all honesty, and the book was supposed to be out, but then again, not, of course, a long time before it was actually published. And the manuscript for Priestess actually won the Hay House Writers Workshop
Mm.
here in Australia.
Yeah.
And I was beside myself, Ricky Jane, like absolutely thrilled beyond recognition to know that my book was going to be published by arguably the world's greatest spiritual publishing
Absolutely.
house,
Yeah.
and that I was going to be a Hay House speaker and author and
Yeah.
all manner of, talk about a trip.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
it was a joyous lift off to the sun. It really was. And I was overjoyed. And the condensed version of this is that as I began to write the book, and I was also going on at the time, it had always been with me throughout my entire career as a social worker, as a counselor, a community focused worker, well before I ever had my own business. My own journey with unpacking my white privilege and leaning more into trying to dismantle my own white supremacy, my own racism, my own privilege, I started to realize essentially that there was a misalignment, especially as what began to happen is that when talking particularly in the parts of Priestess about leadership and sacred leadership, and that we had a long way to go, particularly, for those of us who identify as spiritual white women. And I realized lots of red flags started to come up before my eyes that, truth be told, were always there,
Yeah.
but I had not really been open to seeing or were not meant to see at that point in time, including the fact that, when I started to dig deeper, I realized there were very, very few authors of color in their stable and
Yeah.
a whole range of different things that were concerning to me.
Yeah.
So I started this process of excavation and opening myself up to what this might mean to me by simply asking some questions. And one of those questions were, did they have more authors of color coming through?
Yeah.
Were they maybe starting to come through? Bit late, but still, were they coming? And the answer to that was no.
Yeah.
And then I think the thing that really hit me the hardest was that I realized by the time this book was going to be published, and I was going to have the joy and privilege of being on those stages here in Australia, speaking with other Hay House authors, that it was going to be essentially an all white
Yeah.
or almost all white lineup.
Yeah.
And it hit me like a ton of bricks that there was no way that I could say the things I was saying in this book and then turn around and have that be front facing what I was doing to the public.
Yeah.
hypocritical, out of alignment. No.
Yeah.
And so I had to make what was at the time both an easy but also egoically very difficult
Yeah.
decision to contact them and say that I no longer felt in alignment
Yeah.
with them as a publishing house to be the vehicle to publish this book, and I did not want to progress forward. And I wish to say that I am very grateful to them for letting me go graciously.
Yeah.
Because,
Were you contracted by then or?
yes,
Yeah.
and it could have ended up being not great,
Yeah.
and it was very fine.
Yeah.
And I am grateful to them for that. And it was then and only then that I made a public announcement about it. The overwhelming majority of people were fully supportive, understanding, wonderful, get it, amazing integrity, all of those kinds of things. There were certainly some who were not.
Yeah.
And were accusatory and said, you have taken that opportunity away from someone else. Someone else could have won that. And you know what? They are right. I did take that opportunity. And at the time, I took it willingly. And it was not until later that I realized. And I know that for some people, that was very disappointing because they may have applied and thought, well, I could have won that, I could have had that, and that might have been in alignment for them, even though it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
That then started for me what was about 6 to 8 months of being completely blocked with my writing.
Yeah.
I didn't write anything at all.
How much of the book did you have at that stage? Was there?
It's about 50% written.
Wow. So you just
Yep.
bang, stop.
I just had nothing in me
Wow.
anymore. I really struggled. I really struggled really deeply for a long time and just didn't have the inspiration or wherewithal to write. And then slowly it started to come back. And I think I just needed time to heal. I just needed time to integrate the decision that I had made. I needed time to reconcile with myself around what publishing that book with Hay House could have meant for me.
Yeah.
For my family, monetarily, exposure-wise, travel-wise, opportunity-wise, so many different things. It felt like a grieving period, a loss, but also at the same time, a personal reckoning of one's own integrity and being in alignment with what you say that you believe in and do and want to be better about the world. And as soon as that integration process started to happen at a deeper level, my writing started to come back. And then I started to have thoughts and feelings around, okay, well, where might this land next? Wow. And I did have some other traditional publishers express interest, and nothing really felt quite right for me until I came across the hybrid publisher, the Kind Press. And I had a wonderful conversation with their managing editor there, and just really talking a lot about my fears about this book and about the fact that I knew a lot of people were going to want to ask me to speak about this and how supported I would feel, some of the issues and problems that I had had and whether they would understand that. And it just really felt like right time and the right partnership for me. And we moved forward from there.
Amazing. I'm so grateful for you sharing that and going so deep into it, because I think it was a watershed moment for me when I saw you do that. I really, Hay House, author, vision board, been up there since I was like 18, right? Like that was the pinnacle of success for me as a spiritual person. And the courage that it must have taken, and I can understand why you needed to potentially go inwards and just go into that cocoon of self-protection a little bit. It's the dismantling of a whole identity, a whole vision of a life that seems innocent enough until you did what you did, which was to investigate. I want to pick up on so many things that you've shared, but I remember hearing Sora, your collaborator, speak at Sharon Holmes's event in Melbourne a few years ago, and she told an incredibly compelling personal story. But the takeaway from that was live your values. like live your values. And what I've seen in her work, of course, but also through you, is that living your values and that uncompromising capacity. I mean, I mention this and you to so many people as an example of how what courage it takes to turn away from what we have believed would be the best demonstration of our personal success. How much courage it takes to say, actually, no. And, I really want to just honor you for that, because I don't think it's a small thing what you did. And I know you obviously have processed it not like a small thing, but perhaps there's something useful for you to hear how much of an impression it made on me, and I know on others. And I do use that when we teach ethics in my institute. We talk about living your values, and I use that as an example of, what would you be prepared to walk away from if it compromised your values, and we often find, I think, particularly as we start to get success, that the line in the sand can be kind of moved quite a lot, because we're like, oh, well, that's what you do when you're on this path of growing your business or as an entrepreneur. That's just what I have to do. And this was a moment where you said, no, actually, this isn't what I have to do. And honestly, also have to grieve. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. It really matters.
Oh, well, thank you so much for reflecting that back to me. It is soothing, and it does help even after all these years now. Priestess has been out in the world for 2.5 years now, I think it is. And it was a mighty journey. And, but when you say you want the thing, you are the thing, you believe in the thing, oh gosh, when you're connected to source and spirit and God and everything that is meant to come through you, then the lived experience of that will show itself to you in some way.
Yeah.
It may just be small and seemingly unfelt, or it could be big and shocking, like it was for me.
Yeah.
But there are no regrets, that's for sure. No regrets.
Yeah. And be careful what you wish for, right? Because you might assume to know what, I'm going to write a book and go get a publisher. Go ahead, Jules. Let's see.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Oh, I love that. I wanted to ask then, what was the decision then to go with obviously a small local publisher versus self-publishing?
Honestly, if I can be perfectly frank with you, I didn't want to do the level of work that I knew was involved in self-publishing. Just being totally frank,
Yeah.
I was like, no, I genuinely would rather engage with somebody else that was going to look after that for me and be a part of that process, and this be a team effort, this be a collaboration.
I love that.
That's really the main reason.
And I think that's a great thing to know, because that hybrid model is available. And look, I've gone and looked at their website, and of course, I'm sure many others have. And there is possibility of how you can do it differently. And I think that's another great thing about the industry now, is there are so many models. There isn't a one size fits all. And I think it's important for authors to inform themselves. And of course, it's going to depend on budget and all the rest of it, but it doesn't have to be just self-publish or like Random House or whatever. You do have choices. You, like the gorgeous Glennon Doyle, I'll mention you in the same breath, also launched a book at the beginning of a pandemic. And I know that you had to, turn off the big celebrations, not once, not twice, but probably 17 times by now. How have you managed that process and that kind of grieving or letting go of your idea of, because you love an event. I've seen your Instagram. You look good in a beautiful frock, right? How did you process that?
Oh, look, I think I'm still integrating it, because it's all the dreams that I had about, and they were big, beautiful dreams and vision boardings and all of those sorts of things about the events and the launches and the experiences that were going to be a part of the celebration of Priestess and the connecting in with community. Not one of them has been able to happen.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to have a launch. I wasn't able to do a tour. I was literally going to be touring from like Melbourne right the way up, Sydney, Gold Coast, Brisbane, and going all the way over to Perth and Adelaide as well. None of it was able to happen because of the pandemic. And even the launch itself, 3 times cancelled.
Yeah.
3 times. And eventually after the second one, we could no longer call it a launch. It was like a book party by the third time. And I have only just now, like just very, very, very recently, just now gone, okay, fourth time. This venue is booked. It is paid for. Like, it's booked and it's paid for. Try again. Can we try again? And so I have my fingers crossed that it will be fourth time lucky, but it has been honestly, it's been frustrating.
Oh, I bet.
I have been so sad about it at various different times, because I've wanted nothing more than to bring women together to have an experience. To open a portal into their own world of the priestess. And I know that you do events so beautifully yourself as well. And none of it has been able to happen. And of course, now, all of this time later, it does not feel appropriate to do those things, but I'm still going to try for a little invite-only celebration, because I feel very blessed that the book has won a number of awards and been a finalist in some different awards. And so it's like, okay, let's just have a little party and an excuse to get together. So trying for that if we can. But yeah, wow, it's been a journey for sure.
It'll be like a vow renewal rather than a wedding. It's like, okay, we're renewed. Okay, it's been great. Now let's renew our vows.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've watched all of that as well in your journey. And for those who don't know, Melbourne is where Jules and I both are, and it has, did go through one of the longest and most severe lockdowns during the pandemic of anywhere in the world. And to go through all of that is one thing, but then to go through all of that when you had that vision for this baby to be out in the world and to be celebrated. Again, I really honor you for your courage, but I want to ask you a few more personal questions as we wrap up our time together. And as we've already touched on, we need to have a bigger conversation in season 2 about difficult spiritual conversations. And I'd love to touch on a lot more of the content of the book then, and the social justice and all the other aspects of your work that I love. But is there another book in the works?
There is.
Okay. Do you want to share anything about that with us? When's that launch party? Maybe that's the one we're coming to.
No, this one is a slow burn.
Okay.
It is not, I'm not certain of when exactly it will be finished. It is a collaboration.
Oh, wow.
I am co-authoring this book with my dear priestess sister, Sora Schilling. Yeah. And it is a book that is going to be, I can give away that it is going to be about sisterhood, and in particular, really exploring and opening up the sister wound.
Oh yeah, that's timely. Thank you for writing that.
Now it's a long way off. It's one of those slow burners for us in the background, but I think she will get there in the end. There is a part of me that wonders whether it may come forth in another form other than a book. I'm not certain just yet. Yeah. But it's certainly our heart's desire that we would bring that forth. And I really feel, and I know Sora does as well, that it's a very, very needed book and topic.
Oh yes. Yeah, that absolutely. I mean, yes, I won't even go into the subject, but yes, please, in some form or another, I think that we do need those tools and understanding to help us move through our distrust of women, which has been the greatest triumph of the patriarchy, right? To make us not trust ourselves and each other. Good work. That was a good effort. Now let's move on. So my darling, what are you reading right now?
Oh my goodness. I can show you actually. It's right here. I will read it out for those who are just listening. This is not a new book, but this is Celtic Women's Spirituality by Elaine McCoy. And I'm really, really enjoying it. It's both historical, and I have a degree in history, so I'm a little bit of a history buff and geek. I really, really love it. But also highly relevant for just life today. I'm trying to think, I'm trying to have a look here of when it was actually published. It's okay. We go back, 2015. It's actually not as old as I thought it was. So there are elements in it where I think we've moved forward in some ways, but I'm such a big believer that old books, even if not super up to date in some way, have such relevance for us. I really believe we need to tap into, when we're reading books, and think about what is the wisdom of the time
Yeah.
that this was written. And so that's coming through really strongly. So yeah, Celtic women's spirituality is what I'm exploring at the moment.
Beautiful. Thank you. What do people misunderstand about you?
Oh my goodness gracious me. That I am always confident,
Yeah.
that I'm always together,
Yeah.
and that I never necessarily feel fear or worry or anxiety. I absolutely do. And I am always in a space, as a space holder, of believing that it's really important to own that and name that.
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with my own coach just yesterday where we're talking about, I'm coming back into more deep one-on-one service very soon. And just one of the things I said was coming forth in my copy was to say to people, I am unafraid of your mess because I am unafraid of mine.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
And yeah, so I just really want to get that message out to people, certainly not feeling on or confident or together all the time.
Yeah.
But some people, I think that I do. In fact, I know they do. So
Yeah.
when I share these things, people go, oh, I would not have thought that. And it's like, well, I'm human, very, very much so.
Yeah. Amazing. So tell me, if this was your last day on earth, what is the message that you would want us all to know?
Mm. That you are here for a divine purpose and reason, and that the portal and catalyst to that is your relationship with yourself, and tapping into your own inner guide and wisdom and allowing that to come forth. There is no purpose in life other than what you create and make it to be. You are the purpose, and that is why you're here.
Yeah. Ah, I feel that. Feel that very deeply. Thank you, thank you, thank you, beautiful sister. It's been such a privilege to have your wisdom and to have you share so deeply. Just absolutely adore you, and your contribution to the world is widely felt. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the episode.